Okay. Chapter 3, The Audience. Monsieur de Treville was in bad humor. Nevertheless, he greeted his young visitor very politely and smiled when he heard him reply in a Gascon accent that reminded him of his own youth and his homeland. Two memories that make a man smile at any age. He then stepped to the door opening into the anteroom, gesturing to D'Artagnan as though to ask permission to finish with the others before beginning with him, and called out 3 times, his voice becoming louder with each name and going from sternness to irritation. Athos, Porthos, Aramis. Porthos and Aramis, the 2 Musketeers with whom we have already become acquainted, immediately left their group and walked towards the study. The door closed behind them as soon as they were inside. Their faces were not entirely serene, but D'Artagnan admired their look of ease, mingled with both dignity and deference. To him, these men were demigods, and their leader was a Jupiter armed with thunderbolts. When the door had closed, the hum of voices in the anteroom began again, perhaps stimulated by the summoning of the 2 Musketeers. In the study, Monsieur de Treville, silent and frowning, paced the floor 3 or 4 times, passing in front of Porthos and Aramis, who stood stiffly at attention. Suddenly he stopped and looked them over from head to foot with an angry expression. "Do you know what the king said to me last night? Do you know, gentlemen?" "No, sir," they both answered after a moment of silence. "But I hope you'll do us the honor of telling us," Aramis added courteously with his most gracious bow. "He told me that from now on he's going to recruit his musketeers from the Cardinal's Guards." "The Cardinal's Guards!" exclaimed Porthos. "Why?" "Because he could see that his weak wine needed to be strengthened by mixing it with a more vigorous vintage." The 2 Musketeers blushed to the whites of their eyes. D'Artagnan was so embarrassed that he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. "Yes, and His Majesty was right," Monsieur de Treville continued with more animation, "because, on my honor, it's true that the Musketeers cut a sorry figure at court last night. During the King's card game, the Cardinal told a story with a sympathetic look on his face that exasperated me. He told how some of the fearless, ferocious Musketeers," he looked at me, and with those words with a sarcasm that exasperated me still more, "had caused a disturbance in a tavern on the Rue Férou, and how a patrol of his guards," I thought he was going to laugh in my face, had been forced to arrest them. "Do you hear that? They arrested Musketeers. You 2 were there. Don't deny it. You were recognized, and the Cardinal mentioned your names. It's my fault. Yes, my fault, because I choose my men. You, Aramis, why did you ask me for a uniform when a Cossack would have suited you so well? And you, Porthos, why do you have that beautiful gold belt for a sword you're not willing to use? And Athos? I don't see Athos. Where is he?" "Sir," Aramis answered sadly, "he's sick, very sick." "Sick? Very sick, you say? What kind of sickness does he have?" "They're afraid it may be smallpox, sir," said Porthos, wanting to have his share of the conversation, "and that would be a great pity because it would ruin his face." "Smallpox? Do you expect me to believe that, Porthos? Smallpox at his age? No. He's probably been wounded, maybe killed." "If only I knew. Let me tell you something, gentlemen. I won't have my Musketeers going to low taverns, picking quarrels, and fighting in the street. I won't have them being laughed at by the Cardinal's Guards. His guards are calm, well-behaved, clever men who never cause a public disturbance and wouldn't let themselves be arrested if they did. I'm sure they'd rather die than retreat a single step. They don't run away like rabbits. They leave that for the Musketeers to do." Porthos and Aramis were quivering with rage. They would gladly have strangled Monsieur de Treville if they had not sensed that it was his great love for them that made him speak as he did. They stamped their feet, bit their lips, and clenched their sword hilts with all their strength. The Musketeers in the anteroom had heard Monsieur de Treville call Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and from the tone of his voice they had known he was angry. 10 of them now had their ears pressed to the door. Their faces were pale with fury because they had heard everything in the study, and they had been repeating the captain's insulting words to the other men in the anteroom. It had only taken a few moments for their fury to spread to all the Musketeers in the house and in the courtyard. "So the King's Musketeers let themselves be arrested by the Cardinal's Guards," Monsieur de Treville went on, inwardly as enraged as his soldiers, but keeping his voice under control deliberately, plunging his words into his heart like so many daggers. 6 of His Eminence's guards arrested 6 of His Majesty's Musketeers? Well, I've made up my mind. I'm going straight to the Louvre to resign as the captain of the Musketeers. And I asked the Cardinal to make me a lieutenant in his guards, and if he refuses, I'll become a priest." At these words, the murmur in the anteroom turned into an explosion. The air was filled with curses and blasphemies. D'Artagnan had a strong impulse to hide behind a tapestry or crawl under a table. It's true that there were 6 of us against 6 of them, sir, said Porthos, beside himself with rage. But they took us off guard. They took us off guard, and before we even had time to draw our swords, 2 of us had been killed, and Athos was badly wounded. You know Athos, sir. He tried to stand up twice, and he fell both times. But we didn't surrender. No, they dragged us away by force. Then we escaped. As for Athos, as they thought he was dead, so they left him there lying where he'd fallen without bothering to carry him away. There, that's the story. No one wins every battle, sir. The great Pompey lost the battle of Pharsalus, and King Francis I, who was as good a man as any who ever lived, from what I have heard, lost the battle of Pavia. And I killed one of them with his own sword, said Aramis, because mine broke with the first party. If you like, sir, you can say I stabbed him. I didn't know all that, Tréville replied in a somewhat softer tone. The cardinal was exaggerating. Seeing that his captain was becoming calmer, Aramis dared to make a request. Please don't tell anyone that Athos is wounded, sir. He'd be in despair if the king knew about it, and his wound is very serious since the blade went through his shoulder and into his chest. I'm afraid he may... Just then the door curtain was pushed aside and a handsome but horribly pale face appeared. Athos! Cried the 2 musketeers. Athos! Repeated Monsieur de Tréville. I've been told you want to see me, sir, Athos said in a weak but steady voice. And I am here. And here I am. What are your orders? But with these words, he stepped into the anteroom, impeccably dressed as usual. Deeply moved by his show of courage, Tréville rushed towards him. I was just telling these gentlemen, he said, that I forbid musketeers to risk their lives needlessly because the king values brave men, and he knows that the musketeers are the bravest men on earth. Give me your hand, Athos. Without waiting for Athos to reply to his affectionate welcome, he seized his right hand and gripped it vigorously, not noticing that Athos, despite all his self-control, winced with pain and turned even paler, which would have seemed impossible. Athos's arrival had caused a sensation in the anteroom, for his wound was known to everyone, despite all efforts to keep it a secret. The door had remained ajar, and Tréville's words were greeted with a joyous hubbub. 2 or 3 musketeers, carried away by enthusiasm, drew back the door curtain and looked into the study. Tréville was about to rebuke them sharply when he felt Athos's hand tighten in his own and saw that he was about to faint. A moment later, Athos, finally overcome by the pain... It's okay. Okay, a moment later, Athos, finally overcome by the pain against which he had been struggling with all the strength he had left, fell unconscious onto the floor. Bring a doctor, cried Tréville. Mine, the king's the best one you can find. Oh my God, Athos is dying. Hearing this, men from the anteroom hurried into the study and anxiously crowded around Athos. Tréville had no thought of ordering them to leave, but their zeal would have been useless if his doctor had not already been in the house. Pushing his way through the throng, he succeeded in reaching Athos, who was still unconscious. Since he could not attend to his patient properly in all that noise and bustle, he asked to have him taken to a nearby bedroom. Tréville opened the door to another and showed the way to Porthos and Aramis while they carried their comrade. Behind them walked the doctor, and behind the doctor the door was closed. Monsieur de Tréville's study, ordinarily held in great respect, now became an annex of the anteroom. The musketeers made loud, excited comments, ranted, fulminated, and vehemently cursed the cardinal and his guards. A few moments later, Porthos and Aramis returned. The doctor and Tréville had remained with Athos. Finally, Tréville also came back. Athos had regained consciousness, and the doctor had said that there was nothing alarming about his condition. He had simply fainted from a loss of blood. Tréville made a gesture, and everyone withdrew except for D'Artagnan. He had not forgotten that he had been granted an audience, and with his Gascon tenacity, he had remained standing in the same place. When all the others had gone and the door had been closed, Tréville turned to face D'Artagnan. His mind was still in disorder from what had just happened. He asked his persistent visitor what he wanted. As soon as D'Artagnan gave his name, Tréville remembered everything. Excuse me, my fellow Gascon, he said, smiling, but I'd completely forgotten you. You must understand that an officer is like a father with greater responsibilities than an ordinary father. Soldiers are big children, but since I must see to it that the king's orders, and especially the cardinal's, are carried out... D'Artagnan could not hold back a smile, and from his smile Tréville judged that he was not dealing with a fool. He changed the subject and came straight to the point. I still have very fond memories of your father. What can I do for his son? Tell me quickly, because my time is not my own. When I left Tarbes to come here, sir, D'Artagnan replied, I intended to ask you to take me into the Musketeers, in memory of your friendship with my father. But from what I've seen in the last 2 hours, I realize what an enormous favor that would be, and I'm afraid I may not deserve it. Yes, it is a great favor, but it may not be as far above you as you think, or pretend to think. However, His Majesty has made a decision on the matter, and I regret to tell you that no one can become a musketeer until he has first proved himself by fighting in several campaigns, performing outstanding acts, or serving in several campaigns, or serving for 2 years in a regiment less favored than ours." D'Artagnan bowed without speaking. He was more eager than ever to wear a musketeer's uniform now that he knew he'd have to overcome great difficulties to obtain it. But Monsieur de Treville went on, giving him a piercing look as if he wanted to see into the depths of his heart. "Because I have such fond memories of my friendship with your father, as I told you, I want to do something for you. Young gentlemen in Bern usually aren't rich, and I doubt that things have changed since I left the province, so the money you brought with you is probably just enough to keep you alive." D'Artagnan drew himself erect with a proud expression that clearly said that he had asked no one for charity. "There it is, young man. There, young man. I know the look very well. I came to Paris with 4 écus in my pocket, and I would have fought anyone who told me I couldn't buy the Louvre." D'Artagnan stood up still straighter thanks to the sale of his horse. He was starting his career with 4 écus more than Monsieur de Treville had at the beginning of his. "As I was about to say," Treville continued, "you must need to keep the money you have, no matter how large that sum may be. You must also need to improve yourself in the skills that become a gentleman. So I'll write a letter today to the director of a royal academy, and tomorrow you'll be admitted into it free of charge. Don't refuse that little favor. Some of our richest and noblest gentlemen ask for it without getting it. You'll learn riding, fencing, and dancing, and you'll make good acquaintances. Now and then you'll come back to report on your progress and tell me if there's anything more I can do for you." Even though he still knew nothing of court manners, D'Artagnan realized the coldness of this reception. "Now I regret more than ever," he said, "that I don't have the letter of recommendation my father gave me for you." "Yes, I was surprised you'd made such a long journey without a letter of recommendation, since it's usually the only resource of a young man from Bern." I had it, sir," said D'Artagnan, "and it was in proper form, but it was treacherously stolen from me." He told what had happened to him in Mung, and gave a detailed description of the unknown nobleman with an ardor and sincerity that delighted Treville. "It's strange," Treville remarked thoughtfully. "Had you talked about me at the inn?" "Yes, sir. I'm afraid I'm guilty of that indiscretion. I felt that a name like yours would protect me during my journey, so I used it often." Flattery was common in those days, and Treville liked it as much as the king or the cardinal. He therefore could not help but smiling with obvious satisfaction, but his smile quickly faded and he came back to the incident at Mung. "Tell me, did that man have a faint scar on his temple?" "Yes." "As though he had been grazed by a bullet?" "Was he handsome?" "Yes." "And tall?" "Yes." "With a pale face and dark hair?" "Yes, that's right. How is it that you know him, sir?" "Ah, if I ever find him again, and I swear I will, even if I have to follow him into hell." "He was waiting for a woman?" "Yes, but when she came he talked to her for only a few minutes and then left." "Do you know what they talked about?" "He gave her a box and gave her instructions, and said that the instructions were in it, and she was to open it when she got to London." "Was she English?" "He called her my lady." "It couldn't have been anyone else," murmured Treville. "I thought he was still in Brussels." "If you know that man, sir," cried D'Artagnan, "tell me who he is and where I can find him, and I'll ask nothing more of you, not even to take me into the Musketeers, because my revenge comes before everything else." "Give up all thought of it, young man, and if you ever see him coming towards you, cross to the other side of the street. Don't collide with such a rock, you'll be broken to pieces." "Even so, if I ever find him. Meanwhile," said Treville, "if you take my advice, you won't look for him." He stopped short, struck by a sudden suspicion. It seemed unlikely that D'Artagnan's letter had really been stolen by the man he so loudly claimed to hate. Was there some sort of treachery behind that show of hatred? Had D'Artagnan, or at least this young man who called himself D'Artagnan, been sent by the cardinal to gain his confidence and then betray him, as he had been done so many other cases? Treville examined him even more closely, and was scarcely reassured by the shrewd intelligence and false humility he saw in his face. "I know he's a Gascon," he thought, "but that doesn't mean he can't be in the cardinal's pay. I'll put him to a test." "Young man," he said slowly, "since I know you're the son of my old friend, even though your letter from him was stolen, I want to tell you some important secrets to make up for the coolness you must have noticed in me at first. The king and the cardinal are the best of friends, and apparent discord between them is meant only to deceive fools. I don't want a fellow Gascon, a handsome young man who has everything he needs to win advancement, to be taken in by that sham as so many others have been. I want you to know that I'm devoted to both, my powerful masters, and none of my serious acts will ever have any other goal than to serve them, and that the cardinal is one of the most brilliant men that France has ever produced. Now that you know this, act accordingly. If, like some other nobleman, you feel enmity against the cardinal, whether it was aroused in you by your family, your friends, or your instincts, tell me goodbye and we'll part company. I'll still help you in many ways, but without taking you into my household. In any case, I hope my frankness will make you my friend, because I've never spoken to any other young man in this way. And Treville thought, if the cardinal has sent this young fox to spy me, he's sure to have told him that the best way to win my favor is to talk violently against him, because he knows how much I detest him. So, in spite of what I've just said, this crafty agent of the cardinal is going to tell me that he despises him. D'Artagnan's reply was quite different from what Treville expected. Sir, I've come to Paris with intentions the same as yours. My father told me to never tolerate the slightest affront from anyone but the foremost men in France, the king, the cardinal, and you. Though his father had neglected to include Treville with the two others, D'Artagnan felt him adding it could do no harm. I hold the cardinal and his acts in great esteem. If you were speaking frankly to me just now, as you said you were, I'm glad that I've also spoken frankly with you, because it means that you'll think highly of me for sharing your views. But if you mistrusted me when you spoke, which would be quite understandable, then I've cut myself off from you by telling you the truth. In that case, though, I'll still have your respect, and that's what matters most to me. Treville could not have been more surprised. D'Artagnan's shrewdness and frankness aroused his admiration, but did not entirely dispel his thoughts. If D'Artagnan had been clever enough to deceive him, he would be an especially dangerous enemy. You're an honorable young man, said Treville, shaking D'Artagnan's hand, but for the moment I can't do anything more from you than I've already offered. My house will always be open to you. Since you can visit me at any time, you'll be able to seize any opportunity that may arise, so I think that eventually you'll get what you want. In other words, sir, replied D'Artagnan, you're going to wait till I've made myself worthy of it. Well, don't worry, he nodded with Gascon familiarity. You won't have to wait long, and he bowed to leave as though the rest were entirely his affair. Just a moment, said Treville. I promised you a letter for the director of the academy. Are you too proud to accept it, my young gentleman? No, sir, and you can be sure the same thing won't happen to this one as happened to the other one. I'll keep it till I've delivered it, and anyone who tries to take it from me will pay for his insolence with his life. Treville smiled at this cockiness, left the young compatriot in the window recess where they had been talking, went over to a table and began writing the letter that he promised. Meanwhile, D'Artagnan, who had nothing better to do, drummed his fingers on the window pane and watched the Musketeers leaving one after another till they had disappeared around the corner of the street. After writing the letter, Treville sealed it and came back to give it to D'Artagnan. But just as D'Artagnan was putting out his hand to take it, Treville was astonished to see him start violently, flushed with anger, and dash toward the door, shouting, "He won't get away from me this time!" "Who?" asked Treville. "The miserable coward who robbed me," answered D'Artagnan.